Hello and welcome to another interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,500 comedians over the last 50 years. I'm honoured today to welcome my very special guest. It's only Mr. Gary Morecambe. Yay! Hello!
Rich.
How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Good. I'm so pleased to be chatting to you. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while.
Yeah, we got COVID in the way, didn't we?
Yeah, that was
the biggest problem.
that horrible thing. Obviously, that had to put a halt to everything. But I'm so glad you're here. It's going to be a lovely hour. The first question I've got, and I don't normally read these questions, but some of them are quite detailed. So
Yeah.
Anyway, the first one is Morecambe and Wise are the reason why I love comedy, and I've created this blog and podcast, which is a support to all the stand-up comedy art form. My earliest memory of watching comedy is Christmas Day 1972, when I was 5 years old, looking around the living room in Carlisle, seeing everyone, both young and old, laughing out loud at Eric and Ernie's Christmas show. When did you realise that your dad was a comic genius and one half of Britain's greatest double act?
Right. Well, I don't think I would have recognised that he was a comic genius because I was probably only 5.
Right.
So you don't think in those terms, obviously.
Yeah.
But what I realised was starting at playgroup school, and suddenly being aware very quickly. I mean, I've always made light of it, but it's actually quite a moment, really, almost surreal, when you get there and you realise everyone else knows who your father is, and the teachers do as well.
Yeah.
And in a way, that moment was huge, but it also put me in really good stead for the future, because I was able to work out that I couldn't just go around talking about him in a willy-nilly sort of way. I just had to. It gave me a little bit of control, which never ever faded from me. I've always been a little bit more cautious, and it started at that very, very young, tender age.
Yeah. What was it like growing up with Eric as your dad? It must have been, I can imagine, quite a strain, because the impression I get was that he was always on, and that was wonderful for the
Yes.
public. But what was it like actually growing up with him?
Again, that's quite a tricky one, because I don't really know any different.
Right.
So, I was born into that scenario. So I think as I got older, let's say, what would older be? Maybe into my early teens, and you have outside influences, which is your friends and their fathers, and you realise that your dad is a little bit different here, if only in the hours that he keeps with his work, and the nature of his work, and back to again the fact that everyone knows who he is. But again, by the age of 12, 13, I was completely used to that.
Yeah.
So what was it like? It was great fun. I mean, obviously. And I was talking to the legendary Michael Palin about this, who asked the same question.
Wow.
He said, what was it like, growing up with Eric Morecambe? And he was really thrilled when I told him that it was like watching one of their shows, but in diluted form.
Oh, wonderful.
Because
Wonderful.
he wasn't someone who was very remote from who he was on TV.
Yeah.
Which is why I think he was so loved and so funny, because he wasn't pretending at all. It was all very sincere.
Yeah.
And Michael Gray pointed out once that, of course, there was a separate Eric Morecambe, but when you're doing that kind of work constantly, like the shows and the Christmas shows, you are going to become that persona to a degree. I mean, it might have been where he would have always ended up being that character, but you're not going to just drop that at the studios if that's what you're all about. So he did become this persona in the end, and he was very comfortable with it. We had a lot of laughs, so it was good.
There's such a magical quality to them, I was very fortunate very early on, about the age of 7 or 8, to see Tommy Cooper live, and he was another one where,
Brilliant.
excuse me, he just twiddled the fez like your dad just did the
Yes.
glasses, and people were laughing. They didn't have to
Yes.
do anything, and that's extraordinary that they had this gift and this quality that they showed to the world.
Oh, absolutely. And Tommy was another one who is a genuinely nice man and a
Yeah,
genuinely funny man.
yeah,
He didn't seem that different from what you saw on screen. And I remember probably when I was about 10 or 11 having lunch with him, and I was sat next to him and my dad the other side. And it was one of those rare times where I saw my dad not trying to be a comedian at all. He was just always in awe of Tommy. He just loved,
yeah, yeah,
just let
yeah.
Tommy go for it because he was so good at that. And he just enjoyed such a good laugh just listening to Tommy. And they became great friends, as did Ernie with Tommy. He was their mutual friend through their career, really.
Well, we mustn't forget Ernie, because, of course, one needed the other with Morecambe and Wise.
Yes.
Without a doubt, he was the greatest straight man, the greatest feed for him.
Oh,
To
fantastic.
oh, he was just amazing. Yeah,
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 and more than a feed, really, wasn't
yeah,
he? In
yeah,
the end,
yeah.
he did
Without a doubt.
much more than that. They were like two separate comedians who were funny, but it just happened that Eric was so funny. That was
Yeah,
on just a different plane, and Ernie accepted that so well, and just sort of went with it. He could have been so difficult. You'd have seen double acts break up, other double acts over that,
yeah.
but for them, it just simply were like two brothers performing.
Exactly, exactly. What was it like with the work schedule? Did your father make time to stay at home much when you were growing up?
Not a lot because he didn't have any choice,
Right.
really.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, when I say younger, probably in my 20s, and I was writing about Eric and Ernie, and I remember it came across as being like I was a little bitter about that, but I'm not now. When I look back at the age of 68, I think, well, hang on a minute, this is what he did to put bread on the table.
Yeah, yeah,
he,
yeah,
he
yeah,
couldn't turn anything down. So the summer seasons and pantos, they were the ones that used to eat into his time.
yeah,
Um, and that obviously meant quite a lot of time away. But during the holidays, we would shift up there. We would be there. But what he used to do was he was very good at the times when he was back, very, very quickly becoming the person at home. He didn't need sort of a cooling down time or anything. The child within him, was always there, so he could just join in. And it was just like having a mate there, which was slightly weird when I look back, but great fun.
I bet
So,
it was
so
fantastic.
yeah, isn't that great? And the great that he could just do that instead of coming back and saying, "Oh, well, I'll need a few days just to, get away from the studios or the theatres." Or he wasn't like that at all. So I think he did certainly by the late 1960s. I think he saw that the panto and summer seasons as just work. And it's interesting, isn't it, that once they started on the Christmas show route, that they dropped all the pantos and everything.
Yeah,
Once he'd had his first heart attack, he just said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to do the shows. And then you have the other extreme, which is he always seemed to be there. So
yeah,
he'd been away a
yeah.
lot. And then suddenly he was always there, which was lovely. But by now I was a later teenager and I wasn't that pleased about having my dad's always there. But now I look back, of course, and it was great. It was always there because he had so many laughs that you don't really recognise at the time their importance or significance.
Well, exactly, yeah. And of course, in those days, the summer seasons and the pantomimes were like 2 or 3 or 4 months ago. It wasn't
Endless.
just 2 weeks or something like that.
Oh, endless.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely endless,
relentless
Rich.
for
Yeah.
them. Yeah,
Um, and as my sister Gail always points out, she said if you had those, you didn't really need to worry about earning money for the rest of the year. So,
yeah,
so they had to do them before they became big stars. You just had to do them because at the beginning, he and Ernie, that was the path they wanted. They wanted to get into summer seasons and panto. They'd have been at the bottom of the bill or anything. That's what you did. They didn't know that TV was going to take off like it did in the 50s and that they would become the biggest stars on it. And
yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah.
so it must have been difficult, is what I'm saying, for them to suddenly say, you know what, that thing that we craved for decades, we've just got to let it go now. That's got to go, and we need just to concentrate on what we do on TV.
On the TV, yeah, yeah. Did you or your family listen or watch much comedy growing up?
Oh yeah, I think we did. Yeah, I mean, obviously we watched Morecambe and Wise because there was almost well, you just automatically did that,
Yeah.
as many people did, but we particularly had to do that. I think I wouldn't have missed Morecambe and Wise at all.
No, of course
But
not. No.
sure, yeah, we watched other stuff, and I was influenced by my father watching
Yeah.
other stuff as well because he liked other stuff, and so we joined in with that a bit. And I think also, I don't know what you think here, Rich, but don't you think during the 60s and 70s it was an amazing time for comedy?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
So
There
people
was
that
so
normally
many.
might not have been interested in comedy really were back then.
Yeah.
It was just so exciting.
You had Morecambe and Wise. You had the two Ronnies. You had Ken Dodd. I loved Ken Dodd. Les
Yes,
Dawson
brilliant.
is top five. I would love to interview Les Dawson's widow.
Oh, Tracy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I still cry with laughter on television when they show him
yeah,
on clips and stuff. He was just a wonderfully funny man with a great comic face,
yeah.
a bit
Funny
like your
bones.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was so many of them, and one of my earliest gigs I went to was we went to Torquay on holiday, and I went to see Tom O'Connor with Mum and Dad of all people. And he
Right.
came on, and he did his usual patter with the jokes and the suit and everything. And I was 10 years old, and I just loved the whole experience going.
Yes.
And then I must have laughed out loud, really loud at one of his jokes because it floored him. And he walked off stage, and then he came back on again and adjusted his tie and carried on. And I thought, I must ensure my laugh. But he's in the blog just for that note.
Tom O'Connor was wonderful, by the way. I think
Oh, he was
brilliant.
brilliant. He was such a funny man. Yeah, but then, there again, another 70s comic. There was so many of them, like you
Yeah.
say. You mentioned before about your dad's influences. Who were they? Who did he admire? Your dad?
Well, you obviously had the past and the present. So in the
Yeah,
past, it was in the distant past, it would have been Abbott and Costello because that's why they
brilliant.
went into comedy as a double act.
You can see the
But then
parallels. Yeah,
Laurel and Hardy were
yeah,
huge in their lives, of
yeah.
course. But he had great admiration for stuff that was going on around him. You could loosely call his peers. So people like Spike Milligan, he had great admiration for. So he recognized a real comic genius,
Yeah,
you know. And Peter Sellers, because of his extraordinary talent that he had. Tommy Cooper, we obviously talked about. But there were others as well. You know, I mean, he was. We did a big piece, which is why I got to know Michael Palin a bit. There was a piece on the news some years ago about how they found a recording of him slagging off Monty Python or something. But it was all very tongue in cheek because,
yeah,
as I said to Michael Palin, I said, you know, he became a big fan of Python, and he became a good friend of John Cleese.
yeah.
And so, yeah, sure. At first, he probably thought that was a bit weird, you know, but he was good with it, and he honestly thought that Cannon and Ball really inherited their role,
They
you know,
were.
because they were the young kids on the block,
Yeah,
and they were very good. Yeah, he could nitpick them a little bit, but he liked them as people. And I still know Tommy Cannon well. We meet up once every sort of couple of months. We'll meet up for a bit of lunch, and he's lovely, Tommy.
he is a lovely bloke. I
Lovely
went
bloke.
to a retrospective on them at the Museum of Comedy only recently and met him. What a lovely man! And
Charming man.
oh, he
Yeah.
really is. And my favourite story about them was we went to see them in pantomime. My brother's family and all our family went to see them when Cannonball was still alive. Bless him. And afterwards, they were in the pub. I was waiting for my brother to come and collect me, and they're in the pub. And I went up. Normally, I have a photograph with them, but I didn't have my camera or my phone or anything. But I went up and I said to them, "It's so good that you're still working. You're still doing pantomime. You're still doing it." And Bobby Ball just grinned at me and went, "We're still working after all these years, cocker." And I'll never forget that. It was just the grin of him. He was such a.
It's my
Again, he had
biggest
another funny
regret is
thing.
that I never met Bobby. He
Ah,
died
no,
before I got to know
bless him.
Tom.
They were a great double act.
Yeah.
Um, there are so many classic Morecambe and Wise sketches and moments. My personal favourites are the ones when Eric and Ernie made each other laugh when they were working and they knew that they were on form. What are your favourite sketches and why?
I'm exactly like you, Rich. I tend to separate what is regarded as their best, and I do recognise that. So I love the big numbers they did through Ernest Maxon, the big musical numbers. So like Shirley Bassey singing in the rain,
Brilliant.
the dancing newscasters, I love all that. Absolutely love it. But that to me isn't the essence of Eric and Ernie. So I love it when it's just Eric and Ernie doing crosstalk, because that's what they grew up doing from teenagers,
Yeah.
So to see them doing that when they were in their 40s or whatever was just brilliant. So they're in front of the tabs, just exchanging barbed conversation. To me, that was at their best. And like you, I used to like it when things went a bit wrong.
Yeah.
Lines got, because you could see that for them was their own bit of fun.
Yeah.
Creeping in. And they were having a laugh themselves.
That was the magic of the relationship, because they were firing off each other, but by God, they would make an audience laugh more when things went wrong. I always remember there was a wonderful bit where I think it was the Robin Hood pantomime, and not the pantomime, Robin Hood sketch. And Francis Matthews was in it. I remember that. He was an old friend.
Wonderful, yeah.
And they were like diagonally on to the camera, and Eric Morecambe looked around, saw the camra, and just grinned. Yes. And then all five of them just
one by one
applause, and they didn't do anything.
And then they just jumped back to the screen.
Yeah.
Like nothing's happened.
It's just magical. You mentioned before about Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
And they were one of three acts who had the camera here. They wanted a camera here. Yeah. So he could Hardy could look and pull a face.
Yes.
Your dad was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And the other one was Bruce Forsyth.
Yeah.
It was such a brilliant...
I know with my father, he said that he sort of stole that from Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
Looking at the audience for sympathy.
But it's like the dance from the Marx Brothers as well at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which was also their heroes, by the way. Although Eric Morecambe, the performer, took a lot of Groucho into his persona by the time that they were doing the BBC shows. Out of the group, he had such admiration for Harpo. I think that Harpo he just thought was magic, because he could only rely on visual comedy, because he wasn't allowed to speak. That was the character, that was the gag.
Yeah.
And he just thought that his comic movement and timing.
Perfect.
Strangely enough, though, he didn't transfer that love of Harpo to Charlie Chaplin. He never liked Chaplin. Never saw it with Chaplin. I'm a big Chaplin fan.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah. But he does have a divide, and I've never worked out why, because he is a comic great. There's no denying.
Well, absolutely brilliant, and his movement again, it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And the pathos in his comedy is just fantastic. But you're quite right. There is a divide. He's the Marmite performer, isn't he? Really?
Yeah. Very
love or
so.
hate him. Yeah, and I love him, but my father didn't go with him at all. Didn't see it. Whereas Buster Keaton.
Yeah, loved him. Yeah. Having been successful in theatre and on radio in the 50s, their first TV series, Running Wild in 1954, was famously and incredibly a flop. Most comedians would have given up, but what do you think inspired them to carry on and achieve astonishing success with their BBC TV shows in the 70s?
Oh, I think habit as much as anything. What else do? You just carry on. There's not much choice. But what really changed for them is it was their first time that they discovered there's no such thing as bad publicity. So they went to do a live show in Manchester, I think a week or so after, and they were billed as those comics from television. Something, and of course it's like, oh wow, they've been on TV. The fact that people might not have even seen Running Wild didn't matter. They were suddenly TV stars. So that was a real eye opener. So that the great sort of depression that fell over them was lifted so quickly.
Yeah.
Because they just got more and more gigs on the back of it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
we've learned now. Obviously, everyone knows there's no such thing as bad publicity.
No, of course not. No.
You just keep going.
Do you?
So that's what really affected them. Another irony, though, Rich, would be that I know that when they finished Running Wild, they said that as long as they stay off television, they'll be all right.
Yeah,
Which is very ironic. Um, so yeah, I think the TV thing then just came across, but there are other reasons for that, like Billy Marsh coming into the equation. You
yeah,
know, so
yeah,
you've got
yeah,
an agent who can get you television. That's when it all changed. Really, was with Billy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because there was understandably a gap between Running Wild and then them going back onto the TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they
Oh,
had
there was a
all the
there was a
all
big gap.
gigs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they really did stick off TV for a long time.
yeah,
And then they started doing guest spots, which Billy got them, you know, Billy Marsh. So
yeah.
once they started doing that and were going down very, very well on other people's shows, there was an inevitability that they would get to do their own series. And that came with Lord Blue Grade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah. Do you remember if they ever met and rehearsed the shows at the family home at all? And do you remember meeting any of the infamous guest stars?
Excuse me. No, they didn't. Well, they didn't rehearse anything at home with anyone,
Right.
and not even Eric and Ernie together. But sometimes we would get a script shoved in our hand and get told to read the Ernie bit. And
What an honour.
well, you know, it really was. But I remember my father taking back the script. So I was really fluffing it up. And he just said, "Oh, thank you very much. Thank you." I said, "Oh, no, I'll have another go." Go, "No, you go and lie down for a bit. You know, that's fine." I said, "Don't worry, I'll do it." But it was very odd because you'd also see him nearer the time of recording, wandering around the garden talking to himself. And this was a long time before iPhones. So where
Yeah,
everyone
yeah,
now talks to themselves, seemingly.
yeah.
So he was just walking around. And I thought, God, what's gone wrong here the first time I saw it? I thought, is he all right? And then, of course, my mother said, "Well, don't interrupt him. He's going through the show. He's doing that both parts." Because he used to learn both parts. So, and he's just going through the show. I thought, oh, wow.
That
That's
was
amazing.
that was another magical thing about them because in order to be that good, they had to know every nuance, every
Yeah.
word perfect.
They did, and they were great believers in over rehearsing, as they would
Yeah,
put it. You know,
yeah.
which with some guest stars who didn't have a lot of time, they were busy themselves. I think they found it a little bit of a burden, but it always paid off. You can't really over rehearse in the end. So that was their chosen sort of method.
There's the infamous story about Andre Previn where he flew over and read the script, and he had like a day or something,
Yeah.
and he said something like "Batten's in Chicago,"
Oh, they're
and you
brilliant.
can see Eric tapping Ernie's
Yeah.
shoulder, going, "He's going
Yeah.
to be
I
amazing."
don't think they realised that he had such natural timing, which they
Yeah,
should have kind of guessed with the work he was doing with music.
yeah, yeah,
But he had such great comic timing, and of course, for someone like Previn to read a script in a day was probably just like anyone else reading it for a month and learning it. You know, he
yeah,
just
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
absorbed it, performed it. You know, absolutely wonderful, and was
Incredible.
immaculate.
Still funny to this day.
I think it's still the best piece of comedy they
Yeah,
ever did, and I always remember the lovely late Victoria Wood saying it's the best piece of comedy she ever saw was
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Those 15 minutes at Christmas were just
What I what I
magnificent.
what I love again is the naturalness of the laughter in the orchestra behind them, having a
Oh,
great time watching them when they're at the piano with all this
isn't
sketches.
that wonderful? Yeah.
It's just magical, and again another reason why I do this. You know, I love to go to a comedy night and discover new performers or watch established performers, and it's just a magical thing.
Yes.
Um, they had brilliant comic writers working for them, from Sid Green and Dick Hills
Yeah.
to Eddie Braben. Of course, he was always regarded as the third member of the team, and
Oh,
rightly
totally. That
so.
changed everything.
Yeah, and then to John Junkin and Barry Cryer. Now,
Yes.
I had Barry Cryer on here just before he died. I think I was the last person to chat to him. It was amazing,
Oh, he's wonderful.
and his admiration for both of them, you could
Yes.
tell, was just extraordinary. Um, uh, who do you think? Sorry, what do you think made Morecambe and Wise so memorable and special?
Oh, partly the people you've just mentioned because of the writing.
Yeah,
So they were very lucky at the right times in their career when they were with the right persona that they had at that time. They, got these writers that were perfect. And you got you mentioned Eddie Braben, like he was the third partner, really. The thing with Eddie as well, and it's important to point out, is he took them away from just being performing comedians because he gave them personalities.
yeah.
And once you do that, particularly Ernie, because he focused on Ernie, which was great, making him, the tight, writer that he was supposed to be. The best things in Shakespeare and all that, So you just what Shakespeare wrote.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful what Eddie did. I think also what I was saying at the very beginning about the sincerity of their work. They've worked together since being kids.
Yeah.
So they were doing it purely, they wanted to set out to make a living, but they weren't, television didn't exist when they started as such. So they were just actually enthralled by entertaining people. Yeah. So I think that made them good because it gave them a chance to really hone their talent. And that never left them. So I remember, even when my father was a huge star, like in the mid 1970s, he was so much happier when people would talk to him about old music hall acts I'd never heard of. He was a bit like you, actually, Rich. He was kind of obsessed with all this era of comedy from the 30s and 40s. And he would get really animated with excitement talking about all this thing because he loved the business that he was in. And I think that's huge because I don't always feel that's the same with even really good comedians. Maybe especially today. I don't feel that people are quite so obsessed with what they're doing, but maybe what they can get out of it.
I totally agree. I'm 1,000,000%. I totally agree. I think it's still a magical, wonderful art form, and as long as I'm mobile, I'll go to a comedy gig and write about it, or
that's excellent.
Comedians about it, or whatever. But I totally agree with you. I think to start the blog like I did and have the experience, I had like 30, 40 years experience. There's so many stories in there that are part of me, as well as being a member of the audience. I once went to a writing class, and the woman said, "We can't remember why we've invited you here." And I said, "Well, I'm not a diarist, I'm not a reporter, I'm a member of the audience, and I'm out to have a good time." And so the blog is very positive. It's more like an enthuse for the art form.
Yes.
And it's down to your dad and Ernie that put that into me at a very early age.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it really is. I still laugh at them to this day. I know that they're repeated every Christmas and all the rest of it, but I've got every book about them. I've seen every play about them. The only thing I didn't see was see them live.
But
I wish I had. I think I had a chance. My mum and dad, I was about 4 or 5 years old. My mum and dad were going to go to Blackpool, and I think they were on in 1970 or something like that. Yeah. But I was far too young to appreciate them, which was such a shame. As you said before, it's often said that Morecambe and Wise were like brothers because they worked together for so long. They'd worked together for over 40 years. Writer Eddie Braben saw this and captured it in the BBC shows, as you said. Did they socialise much when they were not working?
No, they didn't, because they made that decision really from, probably from about the 1950s, that they had to have some kind of separate life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that would be it. It would just literally be the work.
Yeah.
And the other thing, which my mother was always keen to point out, is that they were together more than they were with their wives anyway. They were working all the time, which is true. You think of a series of a Christmas show. That's 9 months of the year they were together, and the wives were at home. So it is rather bizarre. So no, the last thing that they were on to do was socialise. But they often, excuse me. I remember my father saying that they'd finish rehearsals one day after being together for like 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever. And then the diary was always full. So then you'd have to say, oh, well, he'd look at the diary. Oh, I've got to be at the Dorchester for some dinner tonight. And he'd go there and you'd get there and he was sat next to Ernie. And Ernie was, and I didn't know the brothers were going. They go, oh, I didn't know you're coming. Oh, so they're together again, being
They're together again.
You know? So it must have all seemed at times a little bit odd.
Yeah, well, yeah. Joined
like not being allowed to grow up and move on from being kids together. But I suppose it was fine.
There's the famous story from Eddie Braben about them. He wanted them to be in a. He put them in the lounge setting, in the house setting, but he wanted them to be in bed together to do the thing. And your father famously said, "Oh, I don't know whether we can do that. I don't know whether we can do that." And then Eddie said, "Well, if Laurel and Hardy can do it, you can do it." And that I believe is what changed the mind. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had that infamous gag about the ice cream.
No, absolutely. And also, Eddie was very clever with that. Yeah, he said, well, if it's good enough for Laurel and Hardy, and he just left it as a question mark in the air because he knew that both Eric and Ernie were obsessed with Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
So it was such a clever device, rather than saying, "Oh, please, would you do it?" So they just said, "No, we don't fancy that." And then my father's only stipulation was that, and it happens in most of those sketches in the bed, is he sits there smoking a pipe.
Yeah.
He just felt that added a little macho touch. Of course, nowadays it wouldn't matter anyway.
No, of course not. Yeah. You know,
but back then, I think there was still this feeling that no, you had to still look like you're two guys together. But they used to share a bed when there were kids on the road.
Yeah, you know? Yeah.
It was only going back to where they started.
A lot has been written over the years about Morecambe and Wise. Indeed, I have many books on my shelf over there, including 3 from you, Eric Morecambe Unseen, Life's Not Hollywood, It's Cricklewood, and your new one, Forever in the Sunshine, The Story of Morecambe and Wise. How did you become a writer?
Oh, God. Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds about me. I always get bored when I talk about myself. Because I've always always geared to Eric and Ernie. You know? But okay, in a nutshell, when I was about 14, I was reading everything like Alistair MacLean books and all the rest of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to be a writer? It's the only thing I could do at school, which I really excelled in academically. So I knew I kind of had that gift. And as I went along, that gift came stronger, that I could actually put things together and praise them really well, and all the rest of it. And that was it. But I've deliberately, constantly derailed myself for Morecambe and Wise, and I would always do that because to me, they were a different level of interest. You know, I just write because hey, it's made a few bob sometimes, not always.
You've done well.
But the real job is doing what we're doing now.
Yeah, without a doubt, my friend. A major regret of mine is never having seen them live. I have watched the Eric and Ernie live DVD that was recorded from a member of the audience 1975,
Fairfield
Halls. And there is a wonderful line in that where they walk on at the end and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, has anybody got any questions or comments?" And a woman from the back of the auditorium went, "Can I have your autograph after the show, please, Eric?" And he said, "You can have it now if I had long arms." And that was the magic of him, just it's right great. Off the top of his head.
I remember sometimes at those shows as well, people shout out, "When are you coming back?" And Eric would say, "Second house." Oh, that was great.
So good. As well as watching their television work from the early 70s at the BBC until 1983 when they were at Thames TV, I've also watched, as I said, the brilliant DVD Eric and Ernie Live. And in the theatre, this is the other thing I wanted to come on to, the theatre, I saw the Right Size play, the play what I wrote in 2003, Victoria Wood's brilliant TV movie Eric and Ernie in 2011, the play Eric and Little Ern in 2016, and very recently at the Edinburgh Fringe, we're recording this in September 24, I've just come back from the Edinburgh Fringe, August 24, I saw The Last Laugh
I did
again,
too. I was there in August.
fantastic.
Yeah,
But
brilliant.
I also saw it on preview at the Eric Morecambe Centre in Harpenden.
Oh, of course it was.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I know Simon Cartwright, who plays Bob
Yeah,
Munchausen.
Simon. Love Simon. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd seen Bob Golding as Morecambe at the
Yeah.
Edinburgh Fringe, and it was extraordinary. I can't remember the actor who plays Tommy Cooper, but he was outstanding as well.
Damien, someone.
Yeah, Damien Lewis, I think it is.
I think you're right.
I think it is. But
But
I'm
he's great.
amazing, and I'm hoping it's going to go to the West End. I really do.
Oh, so do I. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think there's talk of it for next spring in the West End,
yeah,
but I know
yeah,
no more yet. But it's one of those things that it just works on so many levels, doesn't it?
yeah.
You know.
The popularity of them to this day is extraordinary. Um,
Yes.
with books and plays and
Yeah.
all the rest of it.
Yeah, we've been
Um,
saying for years that this will be the year it all kind of disappears, but it kind of doesn't. Which is great. It's lovely because it's
yeah,
been my life. So the more I can share it with people, brilliant.
yeah, it's so good. Did you have any stories of seeing them live and on tour yourself?
Yeah, I used to go on tour a bit because I worked for Billy Marsh for about 3 years, and one of my jobs was when Eric and Ernie were doing a live tour. I think it would have been in about '77. Um, I went with them and sold T-shirts of Morecambe Wise,
Fantastic.
so
Should
it
have
was
got me.
great. Yeah, so that was great fun.
Yeah,
But I remember turning up at the Floral Hall, Scarborough, when it was
yeah,
still working as a theatre, and they were on there, and I turned up at the box office very early in the day, but there was someone on the box office, and I said to them, "I'll come here to see my dad, Eric Morecambe. He should be here in the dressing room." And she looked at me really suspiciously and said, "Oh, you're the third person who said that today." And I said, "Oh well, please could you just check with him because he really is." And she was kind of reluctant, but she did in the end. And of course, he then came up and said, "Oh, hi, Gary," and gave me a big hug. And I think she looked more relieved than I did actually at that point. But that was a great memory. And selling T-shirts with a guy, and he said to me, he said, "You realise they'd pay double if you told them you're Eric Morecambe's son."
that's wonderful.
Which would be
That's a
great.
great
But no,
story.
I've got great memories standing in the wings as well sometimes, not always in the audience because you can do that 20 times, but it's quite
Yeah,
nice to be in a different place moving
yeah, yeah,
around.
yeah,
But yeah, those touring days, I just love them, absolutely love them, as opposed to the earlier days when it was Panto and Summer Season, because yes, they were stars, but there was much more of a kind of lovely, comfortable, honey sort of feel to these later ones because they were superstars by then.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they were just completely sold out concerts just with Eric and Ernie, that was wonderful.
I saw your sister Gail do a talk about a year ago at Windsor
Oh yeah, she does lots of
about
those. Yeah.
the popularity of them. Have you ever thought of doing that yourself, or
No, not really. I mean,
no?
I have done them.
Yeah.
It's not something I'm wholly comfortable with.
Okay.
Much more behind the scenes, really.
Yeah.
Gail's great at that,
Yeah.
and Gail just loves doing them, and she's so relaxed with them.
Yeah.
I remember being on the phone with her once, and we were chatting away on the phone, and then she said, "Oh, I've got to go now. I think I'm doing a talk in an hour down the road." I said, "If that was me, I'd have been up all night,
Yeah.
preparing." But she just sort of just takes it in her stride, and she was doing literally at one time. She was doing about, oh God, it must have been about 60 a year, something
Wow.
like that. Yeah, it was something like pretty
That's a
massive.
heavy work
And then she
schedule.
took like a 2 year break and then goes back to them. But it's kind of like I do some stuff and then she does that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm much happier with that. But sure, we've both done the cruise ships, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm doing a couple of talks this year or next year or something,
Yeah.
and that's fine. But no, I don't sort of make a point. I've
No.
been offered so many theatres to
Yeah.
go and sell tickets and do a show as such and talk and maybe get someone famous with me to do the Q&A and all that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
kind of go, oh yeah, that sounds great. Then afterwards you think, no, I'm 68. That can't be asked really. It's awful to say that.
I know what you
And
mean.
but yeah, you get to this point, don't you, where there's more demand now, but from me less interest. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
I sort of view
Yeah.
it.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I worry
Um,
more about my health each day. You know.
well, exactly. Your health comes first, my friend. When I met Gail, what a lovely woman she was. Because I said to her, one of my favourite comments about them was from Dave Allen, and he's the Irish comedian
Yes,
Dave Allen,
brilliant.
and all he said was, "Whenever I think of Morecambe and Wise, I smile,"
Oh,
and that's just magical. What's not to love?
yeah, and I would actually echo that as well. Even as a family member,
Yeah, yeah,
if I remember,
and me.
you know, doing radio or TV, or even now when we've been talking, as soon as you sort of mention a specific thing, I do feel like a smile and a laugh coming on,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great legacy, isn't it?
Oh,
From anyone to
it's
leave that.
absolutely incredible.
Incredible.
They're amazing. Um, uh, what am I going to ask you next? Do you think Eric and Ernie could have gone solo or worked with anyone else?
I think they could have done. I think my father was starting to do that a little bit. You know,
Yeah,
he did those Betjeman plays, I think, and things, and he did that film with Tom Baker, The Passionate Pilgrim, I think it was,
yeah,
short film. Um, I think he could have done. I think Ernie could have done as well, but I don't think Ernie was quite so brave. I think Ernie, how do I put this? I think Ernie probably came to see himself erroneously, as it happens, as the straight man. Therefore, if Eric was there, Eric would get all the attention.
yeah.
Of course, when my father died very prematurely, Ernie could probably have done a lot of other stuff. But then, of course, Ernie was out there having to be Ernie Wise, who's lost his partner. There
They
were a
did
lot of
try to
problems
partner
with the
in again,
works.
didn't they, with other people? I remember
Yeah.
Bruce Forsyth and
Well,
was mentioned, and
Eric Sykes, people.
yeah,
But Ernie did he did a few sensible things though. He did a tour of Australia talking about Morecambe Wise with clips. I think that's a great idea. He didn't he crop up in Run for Your Wife, that
yeah,
farce, the Ray Cooney
yeah,
farce.
yeah,
He did an American sitcom playing a role in that.
yeah.
So he wasn't idle. But I don't know about you, but I always felt he looked incredibly sad once Eric had gone, and never kind of, even when he wasn't, when he was being funny and laughy, you
Yeah,
just felt there was this sadness, this cloud over
very
him, and that
much
never
so.
lifted.
Yeah, his light very sadly went out. It
Yes,
really did. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And of course, Michael Grade made that wonderfully telling comment. He said, and when Eric died, of course, the public never forgave Ernie for living.
no,
And I
of
thought,
course not.
wow,
Yeah,
that's so dark, but it's so kind of true,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
beautifully put.
It was a nationwide tragedy when your
Yes.
father passed away, nationwide in 1984, and then Ernie died in 1999.
Yeah, and he
Um,
wasn't old either. That he was
no,
only 73, was
he
he, or
was,
something?
yeah, 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 not old at all. Do you think Morecambe and Wise achieved all their ambitions as a double act?
Not quite. I think if they'd been sat down and asked that, they'd have both said we've never have dreamt of the success we had, never dreamt of it, and that TV gave us that wonderful, wonderful, stardom, and the chance to kind of show our talents. But both men would, particularly Ernie, because Ernie was driven by it. Both men would love to have done something on a big screen that somehow mirrored the success of Peter Sellers with the Panther. I think they would love that, but to be honest, that wasn't going to happen because what Sellers did with that was extraordinary, and it was very different from what Eric and Ernie were doing.
Well,
So I don't think that big film could ever really worked. Just don't see how.
their three films were successful.
Oh yeah, and they were good.
Yeah, and they were good, but it was like, is it fair to say there was like it was like the double act from the television were on the big screen. I could have
Totally.
I could have seen them very happily in something like The Odd Couple, Neil
Yeah,
Simon's, a remake of that. I thought that would have been superb in
yeah,
something like that. Where you've
yeah.
got a cranky one and a pernickety one. That would have
Totally.
been perfect for them.
They could have worked if they were really determined. They could have worked something towards making a big film, I'm sure. But the thing is, always hovering in the background was this. Well, we now we've got to quickly get on with the Christmas show because
Yeah.
that took up like 6 months of the year. So straight away, they might have had all these grandiose ideas and
But they,
and regrets that they didn't become these big screen stars. But what they did for TV and where they were being permanently pulled back to, they just had to do that job. And as Ben Elton said, that was enough. You know,
yeah,
isn't big enough just being a big star in your own country? You know, so I
they,
think that that's fine what they did.
yes, yeah. The extraordinary thing about them with the Christmas shows, everybody involved in them, was that every year they felt they had to top the last one. And
Yeah.
you know, it was like, how are we going to be funnier than last time, and how are we going to be funnier than last time? But there was two or three gems in each one of them, so they had such a great number of shows, number of Christmas shows as well as series.
Well, they did, and I always loved it when Eddie Braben used to say that if something really good came up in the writing, they'd have a little discussion saying, "We'll save that for Christmas."
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that was great.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
I would have loved to have met your father and just give him a hug,
you'd have
and
enjoyed
thank
it.
thank him for all the joy and happiness he and Ernie have given to so many over the years, including me. I never stopped laughing at them.
That's good
You
to hear.
must be very proud of their legacy in British comedy over the last 50 years.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, my sort of adulation of Morecambe and Wise begun, you know, when I was 5, as I say, going
Yeah,
to school.
yeah,
Um, but what's really good about that, Rich, is you can put them on a pedestal and become part of their lives and their careers, as I've spent my life doing. But you could still argue with them, you know, you could still disagree. I could still be a teenager, as I
yeah,
was at one time, you know. So that's what's great, is you still got that human relationship as father and son.
yeah,
But
yeah,
at the same time, I could very quickly separate with, but that's Eric Morecambe, you know. He
yeah.
became Eric in that sense, but at home it was just dad, yeah. So that's lovely to have that. But yes, in answer to your question, I am extremely proud of what they've done, and almost kind of flabbergasted by it, because I think that they're never kind of put into a big bowl of these were the British comedians. It was like, these are the British comedians, and we have Morecambe and Wise here. And I love that separation. There's something like they're the head boys, you know?
Exactly. All the comedians now that I go and see and I talk to, all the majority of them, they're on their favourite comedy lists,
Yeah. Well,
and
people
that's
like Lee
wonderful.
Mack,
Yeah,
particularly, you know, I know, because I know Lee, and it's lovely the things he says. And I know that the influence, you know, Lee wouldn't have gone into comedy if it hadn't been for my father, he
yeah.
said. So, you know, that's pretty impressive.
It's
Especially as he
amazing.
is one of the genuine talents, Lee.
Yeah, oh yeah, without a doubt, he's a very funny man. And also as well, the statue in Morecambe. When
Yeah,
I went to see that, and of course you did the other
wonderful.
Groucho Marx dance. All the
Mm.
guest stars around
Oh, yeah.
the thing, it was just extraordinary.
Yes, it's
That,
more than just a statue, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
complete setting and with
yeah,
lights. And
yeah,
at night time, it looks amazing.
yeah,
It
yeah,
really
yeah,
does.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fantastic. Long may their legacy continue, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you, Rich. Yeah, I agree.
And thank you so much for being my guest. I've so
I've
much
enjoyed it.
enjoyed
It's
talking
been
to you.
wonderful.
Thank
I've
you
only just
so
started.
much. You take care and all the very
And
best
you.
to you.
Thanks.
Thanks now.
Take care.